Hi, everybody. I'm going to give it just a second here and we'll see if we can't get some people over here before I start today. There's two of you. Just going to give it a second so that we can make sure we have some people in here before I do any introductions or even begin to speak. So just be patient and we will get with you. Alrighty, guys, I'm just going to go ahead and go, and hopefully everybody can watch us on the rerun. My name is Jamil, better known as Jam or Warrior Queen. I am a recovering addict and alcoholic. Higgy had asked me if I wanted to be a part of the new series he has going on the No More Heroin page, and I said yes to it. So here I am. Hi, Liz. Glad to meet you. I am a recovery advocate. I am also an admin for pages such as my own personal page with Warrior Queens and Warrior Kings. I have a public page. I have a closed women's group page. I also am an admin for Sobriety 101 and Rocking Our Recovery. I do live feeds once a week on recovery-related topics. And, I'm also an admin for the page Recovery for the Beginners and also dope ballers and shot callers. I have quite a few pages that I'm an admin for, with the recovery community. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of share some of my testimony with my own personal story and, share some hope on what it is, why I'm here today. So my personal story starts out as a child. I was, I'm an only child. My mother was a single mom for the first 7 years of my life. My biological father was never around, so I dealt with a lot of abandonment issues from the very beginning. By the time I was in my teens, I had started to pick up drinking, due to spin the bottle and that kind of thing, hanging out with some neighborhood kids. And, at that time I had dealt with a lot of abandonment issues, and I really felt lonely and couldn't understand why that biological father was never there for me. So that's how I started drinking alcohol. By the time I was, 16, 17, I had gotten into pot. And by the time I was 17 and a half, I had gotten introduced to meth. Meth was my drug of choice. I know on this page it says no more heroin, so I was a little skeptical to come on here today to be live. But ultimately I told Higgy the fact is a drug is a drug is a drug. And I am a recovering drug addict. I currently now have 1 year and almost 11 months clean and sober by the 15th. So by December of next month on the 15th, I will have 2 years clean and sober off of everything. For me, I am also personally a dual diagnosis. When I was 15, 16, I dealt with a lot of depression. So I was diagnosed with bipolar, originally ADD, bipolar. And, by some later years, I was also diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety. So for me, as soon as my active addiction years started, like I said, originally it started because of that feeling of being inadequate and not worthy because of that biological parent not being there. By the time I was in my late teens and had started into drugs, I wanted to fit in. I felt that peer pressure. And I basically it really got kind of down the rabbit hole really quickly with things. And, I stayed in active addiction for 21 years. It was a lot of on and off with a lot of different types of drugs. Everything from pot and alcohol to meth and cocaine and crack and acid and mushrooms. So I was, and also experimented with the pills as well. I was kind of that trash bin where I would use anything to fill that void and to numb that pain that I was feeling, due to a lot of low self-esteem issues and a lot of insecurities that I dealt with. So I stayed in active addiction for many years, a lot of ups and downs. I have battled homelessness. I have battled domestic violence. I have also dealt with some issues when I was a young child with my first stepfather, who was physically abusive to me, mentally abusive to me, sexually. So I have a lot of those issues throughout my whole life. So through my active addiction years, I wanted to numb that pain away. I just wanted to fit in with those around me, and whatever I could to numb that pain and to not deal with reality and to not face it is what I did. It was definitely not healthy. And you guys, please forgive all the dings in my lives. I have a lot of different groups that actually are constantly in chat mode. And I have to keep up with them. So please forgive any like bings in my lives. The active addiction was hard for me, you guys. I did it to fit in, but ultimately what it came down to was I was insecure. I didn't have confidence within myself. I didn't feel loved, and I didn't feel worthy. So all of those feelings, intensified, and it just grew worse and worse throughout my years of active addiction. It wasn't until I was well into the stages of my active addiction. I started out originally snorting meth, and I later learned how to smoke meth, and before I knew it, I was an IV user. So I went through all the stages. I dealt with all of those different levels of where addiction can bring you. Hi, Heather. I'm glad you're here. So, for me, active addiction was not any fun. Like I said, I dealt with homelessness. I dealt with it on and off for many years. I have been all across the country. I actually dealt with a lot of homelessness, living out of cars, living under tarps, living under bridges, flying signs on the corner for money, that handout to have food for the night. Sometimes with the partner I was with back then, we would get into a homeless shelter for the night or for a month or what have you, but it was never long term. And it was always a constant go on to the next homeless shelter, on to the next state, on to, wherever we could try to survive. And all the while, drugs and alcohol was involved. My ex actually was a severe alcoholic himself. And a lot of times, you guys, I did not realize that I had a problem. I wanted to blame others around me. Oh, they're too drunk. Oh, they're too high. It's not me. I don't have the problem, because I was a lot of times the more responsible one in the setting. So therefore I just, took it upon myself to think that I didn't have a problem. So I had a lot of denial. Ultimately, by the time, and this is all throughout my late teen years, my early 20s, I actually ended up having a suicidal episode in my, around 18, 19. And I tried to commit suicide because I didn't feel worthy, and there was a breakup happening at the time. So I ended up in state hospitals and, mental institutions. I had a stint where I stayed there for about 2 months, and, so they could stabilize me out on medications and try to, help me get back in touch with reality, because drugs had brought me out there to places I didn't need to be. But ultimately, I wasn't being honest with my doctors and my psychiatrists back then. I was actually hiding a lot of these problems. I was masking them and pretending that, oh, it's not so bad, and I wouldn't dive deeply into the real issues that were going on. So they weren't able to fully help me because I was not allowing them to. I had a lot of problems. I also had anger issues due to some of these domestic violent relationships that I would find myself in, and I would go in and out of different relationships, and it was always kind of the same thing. So I thought I had a bad picker when it came to dating life as well. And I always wanted to blame everybody else. I didn't want to admit that I had a problem. So it just intensified throughout the years, and it got worse and worse. The domestic violence picked up to where I've had, black eyes, my teeth kicked through my lip. I've had a gun put to my head in 2 different places, and I was shot. So I'm actually very blessed to be sitting here sharing my story with anyone today. For me, it wasn't just the domestic violence, you guys. I was suicidal. So I tried to commit suicide, landed myself in state hospitals, in and out of different group homes that dealt with mentally ill patients. Nothing seemed to really work for me. And I always thought, I didn't have a problem. So I just kept going. And, by the time it hit all those homeless stages and ups and downs there, then you add into the factor that, I had gotten pregnant on and off throughout those years. I have lost a total of, I've had a total of 5 pregnancies, 4 of which are in heaven because they didn't make it due to my body not carrying them, due to stress, due to domestic violence. And the one daughter I did have who made it into this world was alive and doing well. So I raised her for the first 5.5 years of her life. By this point, you guys, I was 29 years old when I had my daughter. So I partied it up for a lot of years. I didn't see a problem because I thought, well, I have a job here and there at different times and I can pay my bills. So, basically I didn't feel that there was any real issue. I just thought I was kind of in my college years per se. Even though I wasn't going to college, I still partied like I was in college. So, I didn't see a problem with it. It wasn't until after I had my daughter that I started to realize that, things needed to slow down. So certain harder drugs with the meth and what have you kind of went by the wayside for a while because the partner I was with didn't like me on the meth. So he would drink a lot and I would smoke a lot of pot. And, I always felt like, well, I'm not doing it around my daughter. She would be in a different room and what have you. So I didn't view that as a real big issue. I was always the type of parent that still paid attention to her and took care of her, bathed her, fed her, did what I could for her. However, mentally and emotionally, was I really connected to my reality if I was high, even on pot? No, I wasn't, and he and I did not get along. It was a very toxic relationship, a very violent physical problem relationship. So, there was times where I had to have him put in jail for beating me up. And I'd have to go to safe houses with my daughter. And I had a total of 3 different protection orders put on my ex, in and out throughout these years. So, my daughter was also raised in some of these types of situations. Unfortunately, that's the truth. I'm not proud of that fact. It took me quite a long time to actually get the gumption to fully leave that relationship because of my childhood issues when it came to my ex. I felt like I wanted to keep my family glued together no matter how unhealthy and toxic we were, because I wanted something better for my child than what I had growing up. Now, keep in mind, my parents growing up, my mother was amazing. She actually left, my biological father, which I've never met. And ultimately, when it came my turn to be a parent, I wanted different. My mom did later on meet the right person, and I had a stepdad from the age of 7 on. So I did see both the good, the good and the bad when it came to my childhood. I saw how great things could be, and I saw how bad they could be as well. So I had all of this in my mind by the time I was an adult and a parent myself. So I knew that the relationship I was in wasn't healthy. There was constant drinking, constant pot smoking. And, I was just as guilty. I was just as much at fault for all of these problems that were in our relationship. Even though at the time I wanted to place all the blame on him and point the finger at him. Ultimately, I had a problem too. So when it came down to, us separating for that final time and custody battles and, parenting plans and what have you, well, we ended up having a parenting plan put in place. And, my daughter ended up, hi, Rebecca, glad you're here. Hi, Heather. I ended up having my daughter put, she was living with me full time and have visitations with her. Well, it got to the point where things, were somewhat okay with our co-parenting. There was still a lot of pot smoking. I was in homeless shelters where drugs and alcohol was not allowed. And I actually had a roommate that she was on paper for, being in trouble because of meth. So, she was on parole. And, here I was like sneaking out to my car and smoking pot. Well, she'd kind of busted me with a joint that I'd accidentally left in the ashtray of my car one day just when we went to a gas station. She caught me with it and, kind of put me on the spot with it on how she could get in trouble with the law because of my smoking pot. And I was like, well, this isn't an issue. It's not in the house. It's not around you, So I didn't even see a problem with it then. I was really in denial, you guys. Well, the homeless program I was in didn't allow drugs and drinking. So she actually did the right thing and went and told the caseworkers what was going on as far as, me having drugs in my car. And I was brought into the homeless shelter, into their office and basically was told, you have a choice here. You have a choice to either get clean and sober and, you can continue in our program, but we will require you to start going to, meetings, 12-step based meetings, or, you can leave the program. Well, at that time, I didn't want to see my daughter and I go through any more homelessness. So I agreed to start going to meetings in order to be compliant to keep a roof over my head for myself and my child. So that's how I originally got brought into the rooms. I started going to meetings. I did 90 meetings in 90 days in the beginning. I did have sponsors. Did everything ultimately that I was supposed to be doing. And I was doing well for a while. The problem that happened was that what happened along the way was, I ended up having a sponsor, my very first sponsor, who had a relapse of her own. So I didn't understand that. I took that personal. I took that as, this was my fault and, well, if she can drink and use, how come I can't? So I used all these reasons to have excuses as to, why I wanted to go back to what I used to do. That change hadn't happened for me yet. And then along the way, I dealt with, issues fighting with my ex because, sometimes we'd co-parent well and sometimes we wouldn't. And it ended up getting to that point where ultimately a parenting plan had become null and void. I had let him have a visitation with her and he ended up not wanting to give her back. So I had to call the law and get the law involved. Well, ultimately they looked at the parenting plan, saw that it had come to its 5-year marker and became null and void. And legally there was nothing I could do to get her back. At that point, my ex took off. We were living in Montana by that point, and he took off to Florida with her. And at this point, you guys, I had been clean off of the majority of the hard drugs. I was just, occasionally smoking pot. And then when I was through the program, I was trying to remain clean and sober. What happened is when he took her off to another state, thousands of miles away, after me raising her for 5.5 years, I couldn't cope with the reality that my child was no longer in my house, that there was not the sound of footsteps and, the normal routine of mom, mom, mom all day long, that I didn't know how to cope with things and I didn't know what to do. Well, my normal routine was to numb the pain. numb the pain for whatever reason I ever needed to throughout my whole life. So I ended up, falling right back into the hard drugs again, and, had needles in my arm before I knew it, and I was right back to flying high on that, meth and coke run, and wasn't coping with things. Well, 2 months into her being, down in the state of Florida with my ex, I had gotten a call from the state, basically the DFS workers down in Florida. And they had told me that she was in state custody because he had gotten drunk and arrested and had a disorderly charge. And because there was no family members down in Florida, I suddenly was dealing with all these officials on trying to fight to get my daughter back. And here I was a meth. I was on meth. I was a mess. I was on meth, and I was out of it because emotionally I hadn't been coping for the last couple months because she wasn't physically with me. So when they got involved, I was trying to hide. I was trying to pretend like I didn't have a problem. I was lying to people and telling them I was clean and sober, even though I wasn't. Ultimately, what it came down to is I ended up having my lawyer get involved with things, and he started asking me some questions. And, I got to the point where I told my lawyer the truth, and I said, look, I'm high on meth. That's what's going on with me. He says, well, I appreciate your honesty. He says, but I'm a member myself, and I want you to get your butt back into a meeting. So I went to the meeting room that night. I got re-involved with my 12-step programs. I stayed clean and sober for quite a long time after that. I was actually going to meetings along with, I had a mental health evaluation done as well. And, they had decided because I was bipolar, they didn't want to just stick me into a regular treatment facility. They put me into a treatment that was based out of the mental hospital, that I did, outpatient treatment Monday through Friday. And I was also attending meetings basically every night. So I was doing very well. And I was starting to come ahead. And I was starting to learn those spiritual tools that I needed in order to try to gain my daughter back for having custody. But to be quite honest with you guys, I was doing it for all the wrong reasons. Ultimately, I was doing it because I was kind of forced into it because I was trying to get, my daughter back out of state custody. Ultimately, inside at that time, I wasn't doing it for myself. I wasn't doing it because I wanted to be clean and sober. I was doing it because they wanted me to be clean and sober. So it wasn't exactly for the right reasons. Well, I graduated my rehab time, which I did 3 months for. And I ended up moving from Montana to North Dakota in order to try to have better financial stability to fight to get my daughter back. So, here I was just out of rehab. I had started dating someone, and I moved to North Dakota to, have that better financial stability in order to continue to fight to get my daughter back. Well, I got to North Dakota. During all this time, I'd stayed clean and sober for about 9 months. I was doing well. I had a great, amazing job as a supervisor for the first time in my life. And I thought things were going well. The partner I was with at the time, he was an ex-drug dealer himself. But he had changed his life, for him and his son. So I thought that I was doing well. Well, I cut myself off from all my support networks, you guys. I cut off from any old sponsors. I quit talking to anybody from my old home groups at that time. So things did not go well. I made it about 9 months, and then we started having relationship fights and arguments. And before I knew it, he had decided he wanted to do drugs again. Some neighbor down the way had brought the drugs back into our home. He brought them through the door, and I was still dealing with state workers and state phone calls and what have you from Florida at the time. And things were not going well. I battled the courts of Florida for 2 years trying to get my daughter back. So within that first year, things were not going well. I was dead set on, me not moving any further because I had the financial stability. And they basically were telling me if I wasn't in state that I wasn't going to have a chance in hell in getting her back. So even at the best top of my game, being clean and sober, it wasn't enough for the officials. And emotionally, I was taking that personal, and I was devastated once again. So when he walked through the door with drugs that the neighbor had given him, and he says, I want to do these, and I was already feeling hopeless in the situation on, looking at not being able to get my daughter back for good, I caved, and I had a relapse, and I went right back into the drugs and alcohol. Shortly after that relapse, I ended up pregnant, so of course I had to quit. And it was one of those that we were deciding to move to Colorado to be closer to his family so that we would have, a babysitter once the baby was born. So we moved to Colorado to live with his family. So we quit all the good jobs and all the good money and moved to Colorado. Real mess, because we ended up having to live with his parents. Things were not going well. He was still on meth and doing his thing. And, I was just pregnant and emotional and hormonal and wanting that love and attention, and I wasn't getting it, so I didn't understand. So things didn't go well. I ended up, getting kicked out of his parents' house because we had an argument. So I moved back to my home state in Wyoming, and I was living with a friend, an old high school friend, for a while. And I was I was looking at being 4 or 5 months pregnant and suddenly going to be a single mom all over again. And all the while, I already had one child in state custody. So, I emotionally and mentally had come to some breaking points. I was tired of fighting everything, and I didn't know how to solve anything. And I was trying to fix everything. And I was that people pleaser, wanting everybody to be happy and wanting everything to be okay. Because if they were all okay, then I was going to be okay. Well, nothing was going okay. So how is it supposed to get any better? I had lost a lot of that hope, I had lost, my faith in humanity and the court systems and the justice systems, and I just honestly was not okay. So ultimately, I stayed with my girlfriend for a month or two in Wyoming. He and I were still on the phone trying to work things out. It was very sketchy during that time because, of course, he was a meth user himself, so he was still in and out of the drugs, and he got busted by his parents. They found out the truth and they kicked him out. So he came to Montana with his son, and decided to swing through and get me, and I was going to move with them. Well, I moved to Montana with him, and I was, pregnant. We had nowhere to live together. He was going to live with his family, and I was looking at moving into a homeless shelter once again. So, when we got up to Montana, I had an old work buddy, a colleague of mine that I used to work with, that he was a homie of mine, and he didn't want to see me homeless, being pregnant. So he allowed me to come stay at his house during that time. And, the guy I was pregnant by, we were trying to work things out, but things weren't going well. So it ended up that he decided to leave me right in the middle of my pregnancy for another woman. And, I ended up being pregnant, trying to walk around and look for work, and, bad weather in Montana is not fun. So it was one of those that, basically if it wouldn't have been for my buddy at the time, I'd have been right back on the street and pregnant. So things were rough. And what happened was, because of all that stress, I ended up losing another pregnancy. That was the last pregnancy, my fifth child. And so once again, I was thrown into a hospital. I almost died from hemorrhaging, from losing the baby. I was devastated emotionally because this was the second child that I had to give birth to that was a stillborn. So it was not okay, could not emotionally cope with things. It hurt too much. So as soon as I got released from the hospital, that was it. I went right back on the hard drugs again, right back to the needles and the dope and running and gunning, and was very emotionally devastated. Basically, I had gotten to that point where if I'm just going to keep eating shit sandwiches in life and nothing's ever going to get better, then I want to die. And I didn't care. I had no remorse. I had no thoughts of my family members or my friends and what they would think if I died. I didn't care. I pretty much just, was angry at God and the world, and just wanted to get high and kill myself, whether it be from staying high on the dope or whether it would be by suicide. So emotionally, I couldn't cope. That's the reality of it. And it took me to some very dark places. very dark places. It also took me to sexual immorality. It took me to not caring who I was sleeping around with, not thinking about the consequences of having, different STDs given to me during that time. Didn't care. I was just wanting to get high and numb the pain, and didn't have any remorse for any of it at that time. What ended up happening is one of the girlfriends that I knew from the rooms, she ended up talking to me, on Facebook quite a bit, and she had noticed some of my posts were unusual. And she had noticed also that I had lost the baby and was in the hospital and was in pain emotionally, and she knew that, and she reached out to me. Instead of the normal routine of reach out and ask somebody for help, I didn't do any of those things. I knew better. I had been taught better, but I didn't do them because I was ashamed, and I was, not wanting to deal with any of it, not wanting to face it, not wanting to cope with it. I just wanted it all to go away. So she reached out to me and started coming around, and I admitted to her, I'm getting high. There's no qualms about it. And ultimately, she started coming around, bringing me to coffee. So sorry about that. I had a call come in. Ultimately, she started coming around. Sorry about that. She started bringing me to coffee. She brought me to meetings. She ended up, dragging me back to meetings. And I said, why are you taking me to meetings? As soon as I leave here, I'm going to go get high again. What is the point in this? It's not working for me. She's like, because you need it. And, hi, Alexis. And so, she started bringing me back in the meetings. Well, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to hear any of this stuff. So I would leave a meeting and go get high immediately right after it. And, it just continued. And, it got to the point where she kept coming around and wouldn't back down, wouldn't allow me to, hide my bullshit, basically. And what ended up happening is I sat in the van with her one night in total tears and admitted that I wanted to kill myself because I had no will or desire to live anymore. And she sat with me and kind of, we cried together. She admitted to me ultimately, that whether my children are with me or not, I can still be a role model for them, that I can still move forward, that there is still hope, and there is still a purpose for why I'm alive and living today. Which at that time I didn't believe her. I was really skeptical. I didn't think things were going to get better. I was broken in a million little pieces. I ultimately started getting a guilty conscience with everything. And, I started listening again to what was being said in meetings. I was ultimately told that God doesn't make trash. None of us are trash. We're all human beings. We may have our rough times. Life may kick us while we're down. But that doesn't mean that we're worthless. We are individuals. We are special. And we have beautiful spirits inside. So those sparks of hope started coming back for me. And, the more I went along, the more I wanted to be clean and sober and get clean and sober. Those first few weeks were rough for me. I had been on a lot of dope and I had lost a lot of weight. And mentally and emotionally, I was in that insanity. So to go through my detox was hard for me. I had a lot of times where I just stayed in the bedroom with the door shut, and the only time I'd come out was to talk to my roommate or to go to a meeting. The first couple of days of my clean time or getting clean, I didn't know how to go about getting clean off the meth. So basically what I did was I stopped the meth immediately and I quit running around with all my old playmates and my old friends. And I was honest with her. She became my temporary sponsor. So I was honest with her and I pretty much told her, look, I can give up the dope, right now. I said, but I don't know if I'm ready to give up the pot just yet. And I want, I need it in order to come down and get some sleep. So I ended up, smoking pot for that first couple days after I had stopped the dope, just so that I could sleep and eat. A lot of crackers, a lot of milk, a lot of fluids, trying to push those, waters and juices to give my body some nutrients back that I had deprived it of for a very long time. Ultimately, things started to get better. I started eating more. I did get some sleep, and, I started working my steps with her. And, within the first couple days off the dope, I ended up stopping the pot as well, because I realized for myself spiritually that, if I were to continue to smoke pot, it held that veil between myself and my God. So I ended up, stopping the pot as well. And I have been clean and sober since December 15th of 2015. So almost 2 years. And, life got better. That first month, I was, month and a half, whatever it was, I was living with her, going to meetings. She was my temporary sponsor. I ended up, because I used to be an admin for other pages, and, not even recovery pages in the past. I used to be an admin just for, very fantasy pages in the past. I ended up having a fan that followed me quite a bit and would message me a lot, just wanting to be a friend. It was one of those that we started talking, but I told him I wasn't dating for that first year of my recovery. He was very gentlemanlike, wasn't pushy. He's a normie. He was not someone that had ever done drugs, and he never had an issue with drinking. And he kept telling me he wanted to help me, and I kept telling him, well, no, not right now. I'm trying to focus on what I need to do for my recovery. So, I was trying to stay away from the dating life. I knew that I had had some really bad issues when it came to dating previously, so it never got me anywhere good. So I was trying to do the right thing in what they teach you, to do in your recovery when you're first starting out. And ultimately, my God had a different plan. This gentleman actually, was messaging me quite a bit, and I was trying to keep it just friendly, but, basically, I'm not dating. Leave me alone. That didn't work. My roommate and I ended up having an argument over, the fact that this gentleman was sending me gifts and spoiling me. And it was a money issue with rent and what have you. So ultimately, as sad as it is, we ended up having an argument at the time, and I chose to move out. And I moved to Arizona with this gentleman that I, had been talking to. This gentleman and I have been together, January it will be 2 years. He has been an amazing, outstanding person in my life. Highly supportive. He is there for everything, I need. When I first got here, you guys, I was still staying clean and sober. He was very supportive and getting me, connected with my psychiatrists and counselors and anything I needed. You want to go to meetings, we can hook you up with meetings. You need a ride here, there, we'll get you set up with a ride. And all the while, I was very honest with him about my drinking and drug life and how I could not live that life any longer. And so that if I was going to move in here, it was not going to be. It has not been allowed. He actually is so supportive of me that he himself, as a normie that can pick up a drink and not have a problem, he actually has not drank in almost 2 years himself, just in support of being my support. So for me, my recovery has been amazing, and it has had some amazing blessings in it. We actually got married. Our anniversary is at the end of this month for our first year of being married. And I have continued on. I have continued on to help however I can, where it comes to helping others and recovering addicts, whether it be to get them into treatment or connected to different networks in different ways that they may need it, or they may need mental health, treatment, or, counselors and psychiatrists. However I can help is what I do, and that's how I spend my time. And if I'm not spending time with my network in recovery, with my recovery family, then I actually am spending quality time with my family. Even though my daughter is no longer in my care, the state of Florida actually took, all parental rights away for good. ultimately it's God's will, and I know this, and I believe that one day we will be together again. There is still pain. I still deal with emotional pain because I miss my child. However, can I live a clean, sober life? Absolutely. Have I done so? Absolutely. Will I continue to do so? Absolutely. And anybody dealing with any of these sorts of issues, I'm here to tell you that you can too. I know it's not easy. I know it's not fun. I know it's some hard stuff. But any one of us is capable of doing it. Along with that, as much as I miss my daughter, God has actually blessed me with a new husband. In this past year, He's blessed me with 2 beautiful stepchildren who are young adults themselves. This whole family has been an amazing support for me. And when I first moved here, I had found out I had cervical cancer as well. So I had to battle some issues with cervical cancer, so I wasn't able to go to work and do the normal things that, we as people do. So when I got here, I had to deal with a lot of procedures and work on getting myself healthy. Along with that, because of the fact that I was a meth user, I had a lot of issues when it came to my teeth. And not only did I start to gain weight back because I was eating again, but I had to have my teeth fixed. I had a lot of rotten, yucky teeth. So that's been another blessing in my recovery, is the fact that I can smile and it be genuine, and I am not I'm not worried about people thinking, oh, look at her gross teeth. All of these things that drugs took away from me, my recovery is slowly giving me back. I've had a lot of blessings, because I work from home now. I am able to do my own thing. I don't have to deal with a boss above me telling me what to do for minimum wage anymore. I get to use my creative mind to do what I'd like to do. So Hickey had asked, if I played music or any of that stuff. Well, I love music. I haven't played a guitar in many years. I'd like to start again. But for me, what has happened is I ended up becoming an artist in a different way, you guys. This is how I spend my time in my recovery. If I'm not online or dealing with helping others that are recovering addicts as well, or just getting clean and sober, then I'm at home and I'm working on my artwork, and I take old whatnots. I'll show you. Let's see. I take old whatnots and what have you. Little old fairies, dragons, mermaids, you name it, and I take them and I actually repaint them. And then I actually got this idea from an old piece of firewood out back when I had first started living here. And I don't know, something came over me that I could picture my fairies going into a homeland with this old piece of wood. So I took this old piece of wood and I sanded it down and we drilled a hole through it. And before you know it, I ended up making something absolutely beautiful. So this is what I do in my recovery, is I build lamps, which are absolutely amazing. My most recent one is my crystal fairy lamp. Let's see if we can get it on. I don't know if it'll turn on. Yeah, right, not turn on right now. I don't know what happened to the plug. It was working earlier. Let's see if we can get it on. No, give me a second, guys. I don't know if it's going to turn on or not. Needless to say, what I do is my artwork. There it goes. Here, now we can show you guys. So it changes colors. It will actually go through different settings and change the colors. It would work. There we go. So that is what I spend my time doing. It's time consuming within itself, but being somebody that never thought my whole life I could do anything, I'm here to tell you, in my recovery, I have learned that I can do anything I put my mind to. My creative span, I used to never be an artist or a drawer or any of those things. So for me to be able to spend my time painting and taking old things and bringing them back to life, it gives me joy. It's a passion of mine. It's absolutely fun to do. And I don't use new pieces. Most of the time I find old ones that people have discarded or donated and given away, to Goodwills and what have you, and I bring them home and I repaint them, and then I make things with them and I give them homes, and sometimes I end up selling them. It's not a full business, but I end up selling them kind of under the table for now. But that's what I do. That's how I spend my time. I bring things back to life. And if I were to give it an explanation past that, you guys, it's like any one of us out there that, has been lost or discarded in our active addiction. It's the same concept that I do with all my whatnots. I give them life again, and I bring them back to life, and I give them a purpose. And, I spend my time doing that with people that are still in active addiction. I talk to them. I let them know they're worthy. I let them know they're important and that they matter, and that they don't need the drugs and alcohol in order to survive, and that they too can be brought back to life and become something beautiful. And so these are all things that I do in my recovery. I still work a 12-step, based program. I read a lot of books and a lot of things from home. My spirituality has changed during this time as well. When I first got into recovery, I was very angry. Very angry and very mad at God for all the things that had gone wrong in my life, and I wanted to place all the blame there. So I had to learn too that, my spirituality has changed. My growth in that has been amazing too. It started off with, I don't want to talk about God. I don't want to talk about a higher power. Why do I have to do this? And now, I'm to the point where I'm ordering Bibles and reading Bibles again, and I'm opening up within my spirituality to admit to me that for me, it's God. So, there's been a lot of growth. There's been a lot of mental and emotional and spiritual changes within me in the last 2 years. And, I feel that will continue to grow as long as I keep doing the right thing and taking that next right step and working on it daily within myself, and also with helping others in what they do. It's possible for anyone out there that has ever felt suicidal, that has ever dealt with homelessness or domestic violence, or losses of children, or losses of family ones, spouses, you name it. Ultimately, I've been through a lot of which I would call pure hell from my drug addiction. But ultimately today, is life worth it? Absolutely. Is it possible for anyone to get clean and sober? Absolutely. It's astounding to me when I look back and see where I once was compared to where I am now. And I get excited, you guys, to look forward to, and I still take it day by day, mind you, but I get excited now when I know that I have even more in my future to look forward to, because I'm no longer numbing that away with the drugs and alcohol. I don't have to. At this point, I can face anything that comes my way in my life. And, not every day in recovery is easy. There's some hard days. In my recovery this past year, actually towards the end of this month, not only is it my wedding anniversary, but it's also the first year since my grandma passed away. So I've had to deal with family members that have passed away since I've been clean and sober as well. However, I was able to handle it and cope with it and manage my emotions far better than I ever used to. So all of these things are possible for anyone in recovery. Good days, bad days. You don't have to use, you don't have to drink, and it doesn't matter. A drug is a drug is a drug. I don't care if it's pill popping, drinking alcohol, heroin, coke, meth, you name it. A drug is a drug. And ultimately, you don't need it. And you can find ways in order to get clean and sober. And you can fight daily to stay clean and sober. And you're worth it. And you're worthy. And that's my message. That's my testimony. So, everyone at the No Heroin page, I appreciate you guys having me. To everyone that showed up today to listen, I appreciate you guys as well. And, for anyone out there that's still struggling, know in your heart that there is hope, that you're worthy of a change, and you can make that happen in your life. If you're struggling and you need help, reach out. Don't be afraid to reach out to the No Heroin page. Don't be afraid to reach out to Warrior Queens and Warrior Kings, or Sobriety 101, or Rocking Our Recovery, or, Recovery for the Beginner, or, God, you guys, there's so many recovery pages out there, and there's so many different ways that you can find a path into recovery. Whether it's a 12-based program, whether it's a faith-based program, you name it. There are so many different ways that you can get clean and sober, and stay clean and sober, and succeed, and get that spark back in your eye, and live your life, because you're worthy, and I know it's possible. So that's my message of hope today. Much love to all of you. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to get to share with you guys here today. And like I said, if anybody needs any help, don't ever be afraid to reach out, talk, say, hey, I just need a friend to listen. Hey, I need some support. That's what we're all here for, is to be here for each other. So I appreciate it, and thank you, and hope you guys all have a great day.